These are the numbers most gardeners never hear about the weeds in their own yard. A single dandelion can drop around 15,000 seeds. A single pigweed plant can produce anywhere from 13,000 to over 100,000. And those seeds don't just disappear after one season. Some can sit dormant in your soil for years, even decades, waiting for their moment. That's the premise of this video. Weeds aren't a one-time problem you pull and forget. They're a banking system. And every season you let them go to seed, you're making a deposit that keeps paying out against you for years. By the end of this video, you'll understand why most of the popular weed hacks people swear by don't actually work, and what the research-backed, nearly free fix actually is. Your soil already contains a massive reserve of weed seeds, even if you've never seen a weed in that spot before, and researchers have a name for this. They call it the seed bank. Studies of cropped soil have found weed seed counts ranging from the dozens up into the thousands per square foot, and most of that seed bank, often 70 to 90% of it, comes from just a handful of species. Dormancy is what makes this dangerous. Some weed seeds only last a year or two, but others last far longer. And university research has recorded annual ryegrass surviving up to 9 years in soil, barnyard grass up to 13, and lamb's quarters potentially lasting up to 4 decades. Back in 1879, a researcher named W.J. Beale at Michigan State buried seeds as part of an experiment that would outlive him by more than a century. And moth mullein seeds from that same batch were still germinating roughly 130 years later. That's not a typo, that's how patient a weed seed can be. So when you pull a weed out of your garden, you've dealt with one plant, but if that plant already flowered and dropped seed before you got to it, you've just made a deposit into an account that could still be paying out on your grandkids' watch. This is exactly why extension researchers keep coming back to one simple principle. If weeds never get the chance to set seed, they can't contribute to the seed bank in the first place. There's an old gardening saying that captures this perfectly. 1 year of letting weeds go to seed can mean 7 years of weeding to deal with what follows. Prevention isn't just cheaper than removal. It's the only strategy that actually shrinks the problem instead of resetting the clock every spring. Here's the part most people get backwards. Digging and tilling actually helps weeds. Every time you turn over soil, you're dragging buried, dormant seeds up toward the surface into the light and oxygen they need to wake up. Researchers have tracked what happens after just 1 year without any control at all. And a treated seed bank can rebound to 90% of where it started. The more you dig around trying to fix the weed problem, in other words, the more weeds you may actually be waking up. Now let's get into what doesn't work, because most of the popular budget weed killer recipes online are built on a myth. Take the vinegar and salt spray that gets passed around constantly. The real science here is more specific than the internet recipe suggests. And USDA researchers tested vinegar on common weeds, including lamb's quarters, foxtail, velvet leaf, pigweed, and Canada thistle. What they found was that vinegar in the 5 to 10% range, which happens to be the strength sitting in your kitchen cabinet, only killed weeds in their first 2 weeks of life. Older, more established plants needed a much higher concentration before they died, and at those higher concentrations, the vinegar achieved an 85 to 100% kill rate across growth stages. But here's the catch. Household vinegar is 5% acetic acid, while the concentrations that actually work reliably sit at 20% or higher, which means horticultural grade vinegar, not the bottle in your pantry. And that stronger stuff isn't something to handle casually. It carries hazard warnings because it can cause real skin and eye damage. Even at the strength that works, vinegar only kills on contact. It burns the leaves and top growth of a plant, but it never touches the root. So on a perennial weed like a dandelion or Canada thistle, you'll watch it wilt and brown. And then a few weeks later, you'll watch it come right back from the root underneath. Adding salt to the mix doesn't fix that problem, it creates a new one. Salt kills plants by pulling the moisture out of them, and that part does work in the short term, but unlike vinegar, salt doesn't break down. It builds up in the soil and can damage its structure for a long stretch afterward, well past the point where the weeds themselves are gone. Extension researchers don't mince words about this one. Salt-based weed control isn't considered good practice, precisely because of what it does to soil health over time. Baking soda works on a similar principle, raising the salt and alkalinity level right at the surface, and it carries the same long-term soil concerns while delivering far less consistent results. Then there's landscape fabric, the woven black sheeting so many people install thinking it's a permanent fix. Here's the problem researchers keep running into. Over time, dirt and organic debris build up on top of the fabric, and weeds start germinating right in that new layer, rooting straight through the material underneath. Meanwhile, the fabric is blocking water, air, and nutrients from ever reaching the soil and the plants you actually wanted growing there. One horticulture researcher who studies these myths for a living put it about as directly as you can. Landscape fabrics are not an effective weed control solution for permanent landscapes, and they end up causing more maintenance problems than they ever solve. One more myth worth busting is corn gluten meal, sold as a natural pre-emergent weed preventer. An Iowa State researcher stumbled onto it by accident back in the 1980s, and there's genuine science behind it. Under the right conditions, it can interfere with root formation in newly germinating seeds. The problem is consistency. Later field testing found that results in real garden conditions, especially in wetter climates, were unreliable, since rain can wash the compound away before it has a chance to work, and because corn gluten meal doubles as a nitrogen fertilizer, it can end up feeding the very weeds it was supposed to stop. On top of that, it's expensive relative to what it actually delivers. So if the sprays, the salt, the fabric, and the fertilizer trick are all letting people down, what's left that actually works? Cardboard. That's the single most well-supported, nearly free method, and most people already have it sitting in a recycling bin. Sheet mulching, sometimes called lasagna gardening, means laying flattened cardboard directly over the ground, overlapping the edges so there are no gaps, soaking it down, and covering it with a few inches of mulch on top. One horticulture specialist who works with this method regularly described it about as simply as possible. It's straightforward, anybody can do it, and it works very, very well. The mechanism isn't chemistry, it's physics. Since weeds and their seeds need light to germinate, and cardboard blocks that light completely while it slowly breaks down over several months, feeding the soil underneath instead of poisoning it. There's one caution worth knowing here. Researchers who've studied this closely found that cardboard can reduce how much oxygen and gas exchange happens in the soil underneath it, especially compared to loose wood mulch, which is why it works best on annual beds and garden paths you're refreshing regularly, rather than as something wrapped permanently around trees and shrubs for years at a stretch. Mulch depth is the second piece, and it matters more than people realize. Research has found that mulch needs to reach at least about 3 inches to meaningfully block weeds, and the benefit keeps climbing up to around 10 inches. Go too thin though, and you're not blocking light at all. Some research has even found that a shallow layer can actually help weeds establish rather than stop them. The fix here is close to free too, since many tree services and municipalities give away wood chips at no cost at all. The third layer of defense isn't something you spread, it's something you plant, dense planting and ground cover. Extension research is clear on this point. Thick, layered plantings with solid ground cover provide more weed suppression than even the best spray-based program on the market. When your desirable plants are packed in tightly enough to shade the soil themselves, weed seeds simply never get the light and space they need to germinate in the first place. And that makes this the most self-sustaining method on the list, because once it's established, it keeps working without you lifting a finger. For a patch that's already gone fully weedy, there's solarization, covering damp soil with clear plastic during the hottest stretch of the year for 4 to 6 weeks straight. The heat trapped underneath can push the soil well past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to kill weed seeds and roots near the surface, though it won't reach deep-rooted perennials buried further down. And for the stray weeds, poking up through a driveway crack or a garden path, flame weeding with a small propane torch does the job well because the heat ruptures a young plant's cells almost instantly. The goal isn't to set it on fire, just to wilt it, and it works best on young, small growth rather than established grasses. There's a bigger reason this shift toward physical, low-cost prevention matters right now, beyond just the garden itself. Traditional chemical herbicides have been at the center of an ongoing, high-profile controversy with major litigation and legal battles playing out over their safety, a reminder that spraying and forgetting comes with costs that never show up on the receipt. That's part of why interest in natural physical prevention has been climbing. And it isn't only about saving money, it's about controlling exactly what goes into the soil your garden depends on. So here's where all of this leaves us. Weeds aren't a problem you solve by pulling and spraying your way through summer. They're a seed bank problem. And the research is consistent on how to actually shrink that bank instead of resetting it every season. Skip the vinegar and salt sprays that only burn the surface. Skip the landscape fabric that fails within a few years. Skip the corn gluten meal that only works when the weather cooperates. Instead, block the light with cardboard and a proper depth of mulch, crowd weeds out with dense planting, and save solarization or a flame torch for the spots that need targeted treatment. None of this requires expensive equipment or a lawn service subscription. It requires cardboard you probably already have lying around, mulch that's often free for the hauling, and an understanding of why weeds grow in the first place. Do that and you're not just removing weeds, you're finally closing the account they've been drawing from for years.